Hey everyone, and welcome to the Brentwood Baptist Leadership Podcast. I'm Darrel Girardier. Welcome back to the Road to Elevate, where we're previewing breakout sessions from the Elevate Church Conference that's happening on September 21st through the 22nd of 2026. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Ken Schafer, our stewardship minister, to talk about one of the most important aspects of church leadership, cultivating a culture of generosity. Whether you're a senior pastor, stewardship leader, or ministry director, this conversation will give you a preview of the practical principles we'll explore more deeply at Elevate. Let's jump right in. Ken, we're going to talk about generosity.
Fantastic.
Which you love to talk about.
Always.
Great. Let's demystify for the audience for a second. Why is generosity bigger than just talking simply about giving?
That's a great question. Generosity and giving, although we use those words interchangeably, are actually very different. Giving is a transaction. I have something of value, and I transfer the ownership of that from me to you. That's giving. But generosity is a condition of the heart. So when we think about Jesus as an example, we think of him not as a person who gave, although he did, but as a person who is generous of spirit. Generosity is an attitude.
Oh, wow. Wow. So you are flipping. It's not just the transaction. It is about an attitude. So what do churches, I'm going to say healthy churches versus struggling. What do healthy churches that have a spirit of generosity, or say a culture of generosity, what do they understand that other churches don't understand?
That's an important question. I think that churches that have a good understanding of generosity see that as more than giving. They see it as part of holistic spiritual development. And this is what I mean. If you've ever known mature believers, the odds are, in fact, it's almost certain that those are generous people, because our generosity will either be an accelerator or a brake on our spiritual development. So churches that have an unhealthy view of generosity or an unhealthy view of giving, it tends to be that they put that in its own lane. They think about spiritual development, they think about maturity in terms of things like Bible study, praise and worship, being in church, maybe scripture memorization, prayer. But they put giving as its own track, as if you're a different person when you give than when you pray.
So do you think to a certain degree, people almost put it like in, I'm going to say tiers for lack of a better term, like this is like in other words, like, do you think of it like, do you think of like it's second tier, or is this like the third rail that nobody wants to touch? Like walk me through the mentality of how we end up there.
Yeah, I think that both of those can be good phrasing. It's a second tier, or it's more advanced. It's a 201 course instead of a 101 course. And for sure, Christians of all stripes and maturity levels think of that as the third rail, the thing that when I touch it is going to create a problem. Let me point out that from Scripture, we should expect that level of reticence and that level of friction, because Jesus says where your treasure is, your heart will be. So when the money conversation creates friction, when it creates tension in relationships, a lot of times that means actually we're doing it right, because we're working with people in the area of their idols. We're confronting their idols. So a few reasons why that happens. I think often we have leaders in churches, whether it's pastors or staff people, who struggle with money themselves. They struggle with giving. Their personal finances are in disarray, and they're ashamed. They might feel guilty, and they're worried that somebody else is going to find out about that. And it's hard to lead from a position of strength when you are struggling.
Are you saying that travel baseball may be an idol for some people? Is that what we're saying here?
I'm saying that I've seen travel baseball be an idol in many situations, but it's not just travel baseball. I've sat with pastors, not at this church, but with pastors who have student loans that they've been ignoring for 20 years.
Okay. Yeah.
And so these things create a culture of shame.
Yeah.
And even for pastors that are healthy in this area, then they have an opposite problem. They just assume that everybody else is healthy because of the friction that can come with talking about money. It just can be easier to avoid the topic, especially if your budget is being met. It's a big fallacy. We say, well, our budget is being met, so our people are being generous. That statement is, in my experience, almost never true.
So would you say that you can then make the conclusion that for some churches, if the budget's being met or you're getting close to your budget, therefore you think you're quote unquote healthy without looking at the underlying In other words, you can meet your budget and still not be healthy from a generosity standpoint.
Oh, that's absolutely true. And if you start diving into the metrics in any church of almost any size anywhere in the United States, what you'll find is that pastors or leaders in the church make a certain set of mistakes that are consistent almost from church to church. They look at the average giving per person without realizing that that doesn't tell you what the typical person in a church gives. The reason is that the largest givers in a church pull that average way up. But the median giving in a church, what a typical family gives, is a very eye-opening number for most church leaders when they sit down and finally do that math.
Wow. So if church leaders were going to look at creating a culture of generosity, obviously you talked about the fact that they are going to have hard conversations, deal with, to have a conversation. It's a hard conversation because you're dealing with idols. That stems. But you talked about the data there for a second. I'm curious, if I was a pastor and, I go to my bookkeeper at my church, whoever that is, maybe it's the AA at the church, what's one piece of data I should be looking for to start with when it comes to generosity? I'm curious.
I'll give you two. The first thing I would look at is how many giving families in my church are giving more than, say, $100 in a year relative to the attendance that I have. In other words, what percentage of my people that are there on a regular basis are giving little to nothing at all? I would want to know that number at any church that I was serving. I would also want to know, depending on the size of the congregation, I'd pick a number. Maybe it's the top 5, maybe it's the top 10, maybe top 20. What percentage of my budget is being made up by that small number of givers?
Oh, okay.
Because the 80-20 rule is a thing in all kinds of statistical sets, but in giving, it's even a sharper contrast than that. If you're looking for, so usually your top 11% are giving a significantly higher percentage of your total dollars than you think.
Oh, wow. Wow. And, you and I have read this and seen the data on this before. Do you think for the American church, I'm going to generalize. Keep in mind, I'm generalizing. Is there a cliff because I'll tell you what I'm reading in the news. I read in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, you name it. We've got a cliff of the boomers are passing on. They are typically, in most churches, they may be that 20% that's driving 80% of the generosity in the church. And that when they pass on, they're passing this wealth down to the next generation, but may have not instructed them on how to be generous in the biblical sense. Is that am I making up a problem, or do you think that's a problem down the road? Or
you're not making up a problem. I think when we look at those statistics in aggregate, there's a few things we always need to keep in mind. One is that older generations tend to give more because they have more. That's the first thing. Paul says, a gift is acceptable according to what one has. He says that in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. I think another thing to keep in mind is that we talk about those trends as if we have no agency over them. So something that drives me absolutely bananas is when a senior pastor, a communicator, a godly leader that I would respect says something like, well, the younger generation gives to causes, as if we have no influence or disciple-making responsibility for that generation. A more accurate way to reflect that truism would be, we have not done as good a job as we need to do discipling the younger generation to give in a way that we think is biblical.
Oh, wow.
Sorry if I'm offending anybody.
No, you're not. No. You and I are kind of grinning at each other because we've had that conversation with leaders. Where I've heard it 1,000 times, which is, you take Gen Y, your millennials, Gen Z, and at the end of the day, they give to causes. They don't give to institutions. Mm-hmm. That's right. I don't give to causes. I don't give to institutions. I give to a cause. Save the whales, whatever that is. And I think I can tell you, I personally, and I think, and obviously from a communications standpoint, have bought into that, going, okay, well then how do I turn the institution, okay, in this case, how do I turn the church into a cause? Because that's typically what tends to happen. But I think if you've always pointed out to me was, that is, we call giving to versus giving from.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
And what I'm typically doing, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's been so wise, was when you're trying to solve the problem you just described, what some churches will do is, well, then we need to create the church as a cause or have causes of the church. So that could be everything from like, we're going to start a new ministry, orphan care, food insecurity, you name it. But that creates a culture of giving to versus giving from. Unpack what giving to versus giving from is.
Sure. And I would say historically, the church has not done a great job with this in, let's say, modern America, say 1950 until now. Because when we give, we should be thinking about our giving not as to the church, but as our giving to God. How are we giving in worship and response to God? Because if we're giving to the church, if we view giving as keeping the lights on, paying the staff, funding ministry, well, then of course I'm going to get a vote. Do I like that cause? Do I like the way the money is being spent? But true giving, true stewardship is releasing what's in my possession to the direction of God. That should not be cause-based. That's a worshipful act that should be my first financial priority. So in our churches, from our boomer generation on down, and I'm broadly in the Generation X category, when our messaging is you give to this church so that we can, that is, no matter how you slice it, that is a giving to message. The alternative to that is we want you to give so that you grow, so that you experience worship, so that you give God an opportunity to prove himself when he says that he will take care of your needs.
Which goes back to your first point, which is you're turning it into a disciple-making journey and not just, again, if it's not a tier where I'm going for a checklist, if this is part of a disciple-making journey, a more well-formed believer, then that's the route you want to go.
100%, because that'll last. If we are asking people to support causes or the ministry of the church, their support is only as good as their attraction and our attraction to and execution of our cause. If the people in our, I'm all for telling high quality stories and producing videos about the impact of giving at any church. And if we are dependent on the quality of that story to motivate people to give, we've just given proof that we're not discipling them well.
Wow. We're going to end on that note. Folks, that was a lot. As I say, this is why I love hanging out with Ken, because every time I hang out with Ken, I walk away with some new insight, something I did not know. And if you want to hang out with Ken, you need to join us at the Elevate Conference. Ken, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah, we'll see you in September.
Exactly. If you'd like to continue this conversation, we'd love to see you at the Elevate Church Conference on September 21st through 22nd, 2026. You can learn more about Ken's breakout and all the sessions we've got at elevatechurchconference.com. Thanks for listening to the Brentwood Baptist Leadership Podcast. We'll see you next week as we continue the road to Elevate.